Welcome to Season 2 of the To Health With That podcast, where we break up big health topics into small bites. I'm Amy, and this season I'll share all the tips, tricks, and hacks you need to get healthy with an MTHFR mutation in a step-by-step, week-by-week process. I can't wait. This week, let's talk about vitamin B12 with MTHFR because this one can be a little bit tricksy. So if you're following along with what we're doing, then last week you added in B vitamins as a group. Typically, this goes pretty well for MTHFR folks because the other B vitamins help the methylation pathway to turn, but don't push it too quickly like methyl groups can. There is one exception to this, and that is vitamin B12, specifically the methylcobalamin form of vitamin B12. We'll talk about that in a minute. First, let's check in with where we are in the process. If you haven't added any B12 yet, then this week we're going to add it. If you have added B12, then let's learn a little bit more about the form that you're taking and continue to symptom track so that we can tell how your body is responding. So we'll dive into the forms of B12 that are available and what the differences are between them. If you started with the Seeking Health B complex or multivitamin, then you don't actually have to worry about this. They're designed for MTHFR folks, and so they don't have anything methylated in them. If you weren't able to get those specific products, then I want you to go right now to wherever you keep your vitamins and check the label. The B12 will be called something cobalamin. Cobalamin is the actual vitamin, and the something is whatever it's bonded to. Just like folate has to be methylated to become its active form, B12 does as well. So methylcobalamin is the most biologically active form of vitamin B12. It's also the hardest one for MTHFR folks to tolerate. Go figure. This is where symptom tracking comes in. Now, you wouldn't be the first person to give me a withering look when I mention symptom tracking for the 800th time. I get it. Everyone's tired of hearing about it. But the problem is that humans are used to living with symptoms that change on a daily basis. And unless you're paying attention, a lot of these symptoms get dismissed as, quote-unquote, normal. So it can be normal to have intrusive thoughts one day and not other days for no reason you can put your finger on. It can also be normal for one day to be more down or more up than other days. Symptoms, especially when they're minor, changeable, or transient, just get ignored or shuffled to the side, right? There's no rhyme or reason. This is a great strategy mentally to help you function as a human, but it isn't actually helpful if we're trying to evaluate health changes that you're making. So if you just added a multivitamin with methyl B12 and suddenly you're having heart palpitations 50% more than you usually do, that's something we need to know. Hence, the symptom tracking. I will now step down from my soapbox and carry on with the discussion about B12. So vitamin B12 comes in a number of different forms. The most common and widely available is cyanocobalamin. It's the least expensive form and generally does a fine job for most people. The cyano prefix is actually short for cyanide, which tends to make people jumpy. But the dose of actual cyanide you get from cyanocobalamin is so negligible as to be a non-issue. Lots of people get nervous about it, but personally, I'm not so concerned. It isn't necessarily the best B12 on the market, but it does the job. The cyano group does need to be detoxified, so it adds a small burden in that way. This is also the form most commonly found in injectable B12, which actually the injectables are a great option if your absorption is poor or if you have a profound deficiency. Strangely, different people respond very differently to the forms of B12, and we don't actually have enough research to understand why. So B12 is one of those vitamins that I suggest doing a bit of your own human guinea pigging, if human guinea pigging is actually a thing. So as your health journey progresses, it can be helpful to try the different forms separately and see how your body responds. Personally, I don't do well with the methylated form at all, but respond wonderfully to the hydroxy form of B12. I notice a positive difference with it, where with the methyl form, it just makes me jittery and irritable. If you do notice any strange symptoms coming up this week, and you did start B12 last week, then check your form. The methyl form is known for giving people anxious, restless, wound-up energy that doesn't feel great, intrusive thoughts, anxious thoughts, heart palpitations, and it can even be bad enough to push panic attacks or interfere with sleep. So actually, it's very much like 5L-methyltetrahydrofolate. I don't want to villainize methylcobalamin. It's already methylated, which is a big bonus for those of us who methylate poorly, and it can take a burden off of our systems. It doesn't need to be detoxified, and it's already biologically active. It's the most effective form of B12 for things like nerve health, and if you tolerate it, then it's definitely the best form for you. The hydroxyl form of B12 still has to be methylated to become biologically active, but it has the advantage of being almost like a sustained-release vitamin B12, and so can be extremely helpful if your energy tends to suffer high peaks and low valleys. This one can help to even things out a bit. It's not as easy to find as some of the other forms, but it can make getting your B12 a lot easier to bear. The Adenosil form of vitamin B12 is actually unique in that this is the form your body puts into storage, which makes it quite different from the other. Typically, excess B12 that you take as a supplement just washes out, but the Adenosil form might actually go into storage. There's some very compelling information showing that this form might actually be the best for chronic fatigue, which is now being called myalgic encephalomyelitis, or MECFS. Research has not kept pace with what people are doing clinically, and so the research on chronic fatigue shows great improvement for some people with B12 and folate supplementation. It does not yet get into the nitty-gritty between different forms of B12 or different forms of folate. In fact, all of the research I've seen is done using cyanocobalamin and plain old folic acid. So many chronic fatigue specialists, patients, and community forums indicate that the adenosyl-cobalamin form of B12 has had the most profound effect for them. If you've noticed an issue with your B12, switching to a hydroxy or an adenosyl form might be easier to bear. They metabolize more slowly, and so you aren't faced with the overwhelming rush of energy. We also talked about the different forms of B12 in Season 1, Episode 44. So if this episode isn't enough, check out that one as well. Again, this is a personal response situation. So if you've been taking one form and either don't notice improvement or notice some side effects, then try switching to a different form and see how you do. We humans are unpredictable creatures, and if I've learned anything from MTHFR, it's that the sum total of a human is so much more than their genes, lab tests, and stressors. We are unpredictable creatures at best. Thank you for listening today, and I hope your MTHFR journey is going well. I'd love to hear how you're doing and what's happening. So shoot me a line at amy@tohealthwiththat.com and let me know what's up for you. I'm happy to say that my Patreon page is actually up and running, even if it's in its baby beginnings. There's not a lot there yet, gotta warn you. But if you feel like you're learning something here and want more of the podcast, please become a patron of the show on Patreon. It will help get great information to you and to other MTHFR folks as well. Plus, there's going to be some patron perks. Visit patreon.com/THWT. That's for To Health With That, THWT. Thanks for listening.